Well, let's get in then to the first century Greco-Roman compositional practices and what it was like back then, because it's very different than what we have today. Today we have publishers and we have marketing and a bunch of other things, and back then they didn't have the printing press, they didn't have cell phones, and it was a very different world in regards to publishing. So what I would like to do is sort of get into some of the evidence you cite and get your take on some of it, because it's not always apparent when one reads it what the significance is if you're not steeped in the literature as you've been. What is that significance for this question? You do quote Harry Campbell as saying it is within this broad Greco-Roman context that the publication and circulation of early Christian literature must be considered. And so, in light of that, let's do that. So, compositional procedure. How did authors back then write? I would like us to start with Marcus Tullius Cicero. And you have a number of quotes of him, and I'm going to read some of these, and then I want you to comment on what the significance of them is for understanding compositional procedures back then and its relevance to the history of the New Testament text. So Cicero says a number of things to his friend Atticus. One is, after finishing this letter, I have devoted myself to my treatise. I fear you will run your red pencil under many passages in it. Later, or in a different passage, I am glad you like my book from which you quoted the very gems, and they seem to me all the more sparkling for your judgment on them, for I was afraid of those red pencils of yours. So talk to me about red pencils for a moment.
Well, obviously, Cicero is sending his works over to his good friend to make comments and to suggest additions or corrections. And he's marking them up with some kind of pen or some other kind of ink, red ink. And so I think the significance of that is that, Cicero isn't locked away in his study and just sits down at his desk or wherever he's writing and just pins everything out all at once, and then he's finished. It's a process, just, not unlike something we would write today, where you write a first draft and maybe a second draft, and you get a friend or a colleague to look it over and suggest changes, or even, a former teacher or your doctoral supervisor or something. And so it looks like Atticus is doing, is performing this for him, for his friend, and Cicero trusts his judgment.
Okay, you have a similar quote, and it says, Brutus has sent me this speech he delivered at a meeting on the Capitol and has asked me to correct it without regarding his feelings before he publishes it, which is another example of involving someone in the compositional process.
Yeah, in this case, it's a friend of Cicero's, and Cicero he's performing that service that Atticus did for him, but for a friend.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of, I think it may be in one or more letters of Paul, he says, I write this with my own hand, as if he was using someone else helping him writing it, who may have been involved in the compositional process himself, even if Paul was giving the final yes or no. What we see in regard to Cicero would be similar to that, of the writing process was not just some guy holed up by himself.
Yeah, and that has a lot of implications, especially for arguments, for certain types of, when we're trying to test authenticity of writings, for example, maybe 2 Peter or Revelation and the Gospel of John, or the pastoral epistles and the 1st and 2nd Corinthians or Romans. If there are other people that could be involved in the writing, maybe even behind the scenes, that aren't specifically mentioned in the text of the writing, it could change it, a lot. We don't, it's hard to say how much, but it's just something to keep in mind.
Well, it introduces a methodological question about using word statistics and other things as a guide to the questions of authorship.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not to say that we can't do that. It's just something that we should keep in the back of our mind when we are trying to determine that. That's all.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. Credible Faith is a global missions-minded apologetics ministry with content available in 7 different languages across 7 websites: German, Russian, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and English. If you would like to support the global apologetics work of Credible Faith, go to crediblefaith.org and click on the donate icon. If you would like me to give an apologetics workshop or participate in a debate at your university, or if you would like me to give a Great Commission missions conference or apologetics conference at your church, get in touch with me through the Contact Us section of the Credible Faith website. You can also submit a request through the website to get Credible Faith's monthly email. If you are a native speaker of Russian, German, Italian, French, Spanish, or Portuguese, and if you notice that an essay from the English website is not available on the Credible Faith website for your language, feel free to get in touch with me about translating the essay, and I would read through your translated material for quality control and the desire to see content from the essay made available in your language. Thank you for listening, and have a great night.